Hello, everybody. So this week we are going to read Rip Van Winkle, The Man Who Slept Through Change. And this book is originally by Washington Irving, but is retold by Katie Griffiths, and it's illustrated by Brian Garvey. Enjoy. This is a very old American short story. Long time ago, before the American Revolutionary War, there was a man called Rip Van Winkle. He lived in a little village at the foot of the Catskill Mountains. Rip was very good-natured. He used to play with the local children, telling them stories and fixing their toys. However, Rip was also very lazy. He disliked any kind of work. His farm was a wreck, and his own children ran around the village dirty and in rags. Rip Van Winkle would happily have wasted his life away fishing and walking in the woods with his dog Wolf. There's Wolf. He had a wife. Her name was Dame Van Winkle, and she was not happy at all. Her husband did nothing to help around the house or the farm. Every time she asked him to fix the fence or take care of the animals, he would promise to do it and then wander off and forget. She became angrier and angrier. "You are bringing our family to ruin," she would shout, but Rip Van Winkle would simply shrug, roll his eyes, and say nothing. This annoyed his wife even more. Rip Van Winkle started to visit the village tavern where many of his friends were to escape arguments with his wife, but she would still find him and drag him back home. Eventually, Rip began taking long walks in the Catskill Mountains with his dog and his gun. One day, when Rip was out walking, he found his way to the highest part of the Catskill Mountains. He sat down to look at the beautiful view for a long time. By the time he had finished daydreaming, it was evening. Rip Van Winkle knew his wife would be angry and that he had been gone all day. "Oh, what will I tell her?" he thought. He turned to leave and heard a voice. "Rip Van Winkle! Rip Van Winkle!" Rip looked all around but could not see anyone. He turned to leave again. "Rip Van Winkle! Rip Van Winkle!" Rip looked around again. His dog Wolf growled and seemed scared. Rip started to feel nervous. Then he noticed a man down the mountain in the glen. He waved at Rip Van Winkle. "Must be one of my neighbors," Rip thought. He hurried down the mountain to help the man. As he got closer, he saw that the man was a stranger. He was dressed in very old clothes and carried a large barrel called a keg on his back. The stranger didn't speak, but motioned for Rip to help him carry the keg. Rip was a little scared, but hurried to help the man. In silence, they walked up the mountain carrying the barrel. Ahead, Rip could hear what seemed like thunder. He wondered where they were going and why, but he was too afraid to ask. After walking for a long time, they reached a large gap called a clearing in the trees. Rip Van Winkle couldn't believe his eyes. In the clearing was a group of odd little men playing ninepins. They were dressed in very strange, old-fashioned clothes. Each one had a beard of a different length and color. Although they were playing a game, the little men looked sad and stood very still. So here's the ninepins he's talking about. I think it's kind of like a bowling game. As Rip and the stranger entered the clearing, the group stopped their game and turned back to look at them. Without a word, the stranger poked a hole in the barrel and began pouring the keg's drink into cups. He signaled Rip Van Winkle to serve everyone drinks. The little men drank in silence and returned to their game. Soon Rip Van Winkle was forgotten by all, and he started to feel braver. He tried some of the stranger's drink. It tasted wonderful. Rip drank more and more until he began to feel very sleepy. He lay down at the foot of a tree and was soon fast asleep. When Rip Van Winkle awoke, the sun was out and it was morning. Rip stretched and looked around. The stranger and the little men were gone. The ninepins were gone. It was as if they had never been there. Suddenly, Rip Van Winkle remembered his wife and family. "Dame Van Winkle will be so angry," he worried. He got up to leave and looked around for his gun and dog. Where his shiny, well-oiled gun had been, there was now an old, rusty one. Rip felt angry. The men had clearly played a trick on him and switched his gun. He called out for his dog, but he couldn't find Wolf anymore. "Maybe he's gone back to the house," wondered Rip. He set off walking back home, but now his arms and legs felt stiff and his back ached. "Sleeping outside does not agree with me," thought Rip. "I must be careful not to get sick." Eventually, Rip Van Winkle reached his house. He stared at it in surprise. Dame Van Winkle had always kept the house clean, but now it was a mess. The wood had rotted and the door hung off its hinges. It looked deserted. Rip called for his wife and children, but there was no reply. Suddenly, a half-starved dog appeared. It looked like Wolf, but much older. "Wolf?" Rip cried. But the dog snarled and growled. "My own dog does not recognize me," thought Rip Van Winkle. He felt very confused and worried. Then he ran to the village tavern to find his old friends. When he reached the place, he had another surprise. The tavern was gone. In its place was a large hotel with a tall flagpole outside. At the top of the pole was a new flag that Rip had never seen before. It was red, white, and blue, and covered with stars and stripes. The tavern's painting of the English King George III had been replaced with a picture of a rosy-cheeked man with a fancy hat. Underneath the new painting were the words General Washington. That's George Washington. The idle customers who usually filled the tavern were gone. The bar of this new hotel was full of busy-looking people arguing. Rip Van Winkle heard the words like Congress, the Revolutionary War, and Republicans. He didn't understand their conversations at all. Rip entered the bar and looked around wildly for his friends. The locals looked at him suspiciously. Who was this crazy-looking man holding a gun? Rip began asking people in the bar about his friends. Where were they? Had anyone seen them? After questioning the locals, Rip discovered that his friends had either died or moved away. One was now a senator, but Rip didn't know what that meant either. Nobody here recognizes me, Rip thought. Where's Rip Van Winkle? He asked the crowd. Rip? He's just outside by that tree, said one man. He pointed out the window. Rip Van Winkle looked and saw his own son. Now much older and wearing tattered clothes, he was the very image of Rip himself. Rip sat down in despair. What had happened? Shh, Rip, stop your crying. Hearing his name, Rip looked at the crowd. A pretty young woman was holding a baby in her arms. She was trying to stop its loud cries. Rip couldn't believe his eyes. It was his daughter, Judith. She had grown up and now had her own children. He called to Judith and asked her who her parents were. She was surprised, but answered him. My father disappeared many years ago. He died in the forest, we think, but no one knows exactly. And your mother? Rip asked. She died too, not long ago. Hearing this, Rip could not keep quiet any more. I am Rip Van Winkle, he cried. I am your father. Rip Van Winkle, is that you? Where have you been? Cried a voice. Rip now saw his old friend, Peter Vanderdonk, pushing through the crowd. Peter was now very old and walked with a cane. The two friends embraced. Peter explained that Rip Van Winkle had been gone for nearly 20 years. The village thought he was dead. Rip told Peter about his strange night with the little men. The other men in the bar began to laugh. This old man must be crazy. Rip Van Winkle, however, did not care. He and his daughter were so happy to see each other. They hugged, and Judith took Rip back to her house to live with her husband and her children. Now, a very old man, Rip Van Winkle, went back to his carefree life. He would spend the rest of his years happily playing with his grandchildren. The end. So, can you imagine falling asleep like that and you wake up and your kids are grown up and you have grandchildren and you don't even know it? So try to think about what the moral to this story might be. All right, I will see you guys next week. Don't forget to fill out the Google form for me at the end so I know that you listened to the story and you completed the form. Miss you guys. Bye.